Nowadays, it seems you can't even walk into a Hot Topic store without seeing some form of anime apparel. That's because there was a boom in anime coming in from Japan into the West during the 90s and 2000s that carries on until today. The most popular examples of this phenomenon being Pokemon, Sailor Moon, Demon Slayer, and My Hero Academia. However, when adapting a piece of foreign media into English, you're bound to run into some sort of social and translational challenges. This is called westernization, and it exists in all forms of foreign media to some extent. An example of this can be changing the names of characters from a Japanese-sounding name to an English-sounding one, such as from Haruka to Mei. But a larger change can alter the whole meaning and overarching narrative of the show. While this might help a new audience understand it more, it can also change the author's intent with writing the piece of media. One can assume some changes had to be made to the source material. Some of these changes can be as small as changing a name or changing the entire plot. Thus, this creates a debate. Is the westernization of anime a force for good, or is it overall harming the anime industry? Moreover, has this westernization been a success or a failure, and what have some of the consequences of this been? Before getting into this debate, a historical context is needed about the history of art and animation in Japan. Many things happened in Japan in 1917. Such as the country saw an industrial boom, but most notably, it was also the year that the first Japanese animated film came out, called The Battle in the Monkey and the Crab. And this film was created by animation legend Shimokawa Oten. It was a short 5-minute film, but it started an animation revolution that lasts until today. Unfortunately, we cannot see this film because, like many others of its time, it was lost in the devastating 1932 Kanto earthquake. By the late 1930s, Japan was involved as a part of the Axis powers in World War II. This changed a lot of things for the anime industry, most notably being some of the most culturally significant and profitable films of this time was wartime propaganda. The most famous of these animated films was Sacred Sailors. This film was about a boy named Momotaro and his friends, the Sacred Sailors, the dog, the pheasant, and the monkey. These 4 protagonists combat the foreign powers when they start to threaten Japan and its empire. After the war, animation became a lot more commercialized and more for leisure. Around the 1950s, some familiar names start to get their footing in the anime industry. Some of these names include Toei Animation. Toei is a company which in later years produced shows like Sailor Moon, Precure, One Piece, and Dragon Ball, just to name a few. Yet in 1958, Toei released Hakujaiden, The Tale of the White Serpent. It had a runtime of 78 minutes, therefore making it the first feature-length, colored anime film. This film was made for leisure purposes and was made without agenda backing it. This then leads us to 1963, when American Fred Ladd discovered a show called Astro Boy while in Japan on business. He enjoyed it so much that he brought it back to the US. This show is widely regarded as the first anime program in America, and it was hugely influential in its genre. Astro Boy is a sci-fi and adventure story about a not-so-mad scientist, Tenma, who creates a robot after his son dies in a car accident. Later, he will realize that his robot cannot change and cannot feel typical human emotions. Yet, Astro will be able to achieve everything the scientist Tenma wants him to, yet he still cannot age. Tenma, however, still ends up selling his son to the Ham Eggs Robot Circus, where he would have many misadventures. While popular in Japan, Astro Boy was a flop on release in America. Part of this is due to how the story was changed. Some parts of the show were completely unrecognizable from its original Japanese airing. For example, in the first season, one episode wasn't aired due to a dog being operated on. Due to its gory and grotesque nature, this scene was not allowed to air in America, as the show was aimed towards children. This example of American censorship and other situations greatly angered the series creator Osamu Tezuka. This kind of editing now creates the debate around how media will be translated. Although Astro Boy wasn't a hit for NBC in 1963, it did do well with a niche audience, paving the way for mainstream popularity of anime in the United States. Before we get into how anime really took off in the West, we need to understand what a sub and a dub are. Sub is shorthand for subtitles. In anime, this can mean keeping the original Japanese audio and adding English captioning to the bottom of the screen. Dubbing anime, however, became a standardized practice in children's television anime. It involves taking the original animation and putting English words and customs into the script. Since most audiences want to follow a story in their own language, this is an important part of having any piece of foreign media come into a different culture. Despite being dubbed and the raging debate surrounding it, anime really began to take off in the 1990s when Pokemon came to America. Launched in 1996 by Game Freak, the series saw near immediate success, unlike earlier anime programs. The animated show was fun, fast-paced, and engaging. Due to its popularity, anime really exploded in 1997, and more TV stations began programming anime shows to caption on the popularity of Pokemon. The company in charge of dubbing the series was called 4Kids Entertainment. 4Kids is a licensing corporation primarily focusing on children's media. It is probably most famously known for Winx Club, Yu-Gi-Oh!, as well as Pokemon. When an anime is put through this sort of machine, it can really damage the ending product. When a show isn't treated like a work of art and instead treated like a product by a foreign industry, it can really damage the quality of a show and the purpose of it overall. Like in the case of a little-known show called Ghost Stories, which was taken from a boring and inoffensive show for children and was turned into a raunchy comedy for adults. Although this is an extremely rare phenomenon, it still exists as an example of bad westernization. When people don't understand the culture that the show is from, it can really stunt the show. As stated earlier, most of children's anime is a product of 4Kids Entertainment. In some cases, the scenes and plot were relatively unchanged, but in other instances, the plots were completely overhauled. A few episodes have a scene or two cut, yet in other series, they were completely ripped apart. These massive changes have gone down in infamy within the anime fandom. These scenes can be damaging to the overall quality of a show. Sometimes, like in this scene.
Let's go, Kaiba. On your feet. Mr. Pegasus would like to have a few words with you. I bet he would, but it'll take more than you two goons to grab me.
It can make the scene lose all its purpose and just come off as silly. This is where the question of authorial intent comes in. For example, in the case of a raunchy comedy like One Piece being watered down into a clean, family-friendly show for kids, what is left? That is completely do away with the show's original themes and visual comedy. This neutering of the source material led to many changes, the most notable of which being the censorship of women's bodies, as well as cigarette and alcohol usage. Given that the show's original intended audience was teenagers and young adults, 4Kids marketing it towards younger children was not the way to go. Another form of censorship that is important to discuss is the censorship of queer characters and stories from children's anime. The two largest examples of this are Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus from Sailor Moon. In the original Japanese dub, they are in a lesbian relationship, and Sailor Neptune is implied to be some sort of non-binary or gender fluid. Yet, in the American dub of this iconic show, they were rebranded as cousins, and Sailor Neptune was labeled as a tomboy. The different sides of this debate ask for an authentic view of this way of loving, yet others whom oppose this think that it's taking away from traditional family values. Although the United States and Japan have both struggled with LGBT acceptance, this type of censorship can alienate audiences and change the author's original intent. The question of what dubbing practices should look like is a highly contested one within the anime community. The most common and prevailing thoughts are that the majority of the newer fans think that it's fine to change minor plot elements. They would prefer it to be as authentic to the original show as possible. However, the form of localization spoken about earlier still continues in shows like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! That are aimed towards children on networks like Disney or Cartoon Network. Westernization is the inevitable price to pay of importing media to a more conservative West. And while the plots of different shows have been changed, overall, it should be seen as a positive because thousands of Western kids are exposed to the product. Like in other Japanese imports, sushi, anime is an acquired taste. And like sushi, the beginner finds things that are easy to digest. As they gradually expand, they search for more and new interesting flavors. The same is true with a person who loves anime.